Well, good afternoon to you. It is 4:06 now. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, Matt Lewis joins us. Our buddy Matt Lewis, a new book on how all of these politicians have gotten filthy rich. Looking at you, Nancy Pelosi. And Alicia Brand joins us at 5 o'clock as we explore how Loudoun County officials have been stealing from the taxpayers in order to go on some pretty lavish trips overseas. You can join us today at 888-630-9625. 888-630-WMAL. Headline today from the New York Times: 7 AI companies, artificial intelligence that is, agree to safeguards after pressure from the White House. Does that make you feel good? That the Biden White House pressured all of the artificial intelligence companies, including Amazon, Google, and Meta, which is, the parent company of Facebook, to agree to, quote, safeguards. I'm sure that's going to work out great for us. On the issue of artificial intelligence, here is our no intelligence president today.
These commitments are a promising step, but we have a lot more work to do together. Realizing the promise of AI while managing the risk is going to require some new laws, regulations, and oversight.
Uh-oh, here come the new laws, regulations, and oversight. Not for your benefit, just for the government's. Here's more from Biden.
Artificial intelligence promises an enormous promise of both risks to our society and our economy and our national security, but also incredible opportunities.
One of the things they want to address, according to the commitments that we found out from the White House today and these organizations, they want to prevent the risks of bias and discrimination. Now, I should point out, computers, by definition, do not have bias in them. They're just sorting through data and then spitting out an answer. Bias is introduced when people like Joe Biden and his friends get involved. For more on this, let's bring in Jon Schweppe. He's the Director of Policy and Government Affairs for the American Principles Project, and he joins us now. Hello, John.
Hey, Vince. How's it going?
It's going well, but I'm concerned because AI is a powerful tool here and has been fascinating to see develop. But now the White House is jumping in, and given their history of censoring the internet, I don't have any faith whatsoever in their handling of this.
Yeah, anytime you hear the Democrats talking about safeguarding the internet or any of that stuff, you should probably be pretty scared.
Yes.
The reality here is they are obsessed, as they have been for years now, with punishing misinformation, de-amplifying it, preventing it from being seen. And when they say misinformation, of course, what they mean is, stuff that's inconvenient for Joe Biden, right? The Hunter Biden story in the New York Post or any of these different things. So, ultimately, this is what they're going to use it for. It's going to be to suppress speech. And I think Republicans need to recognize that and be pretty aggressive here.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about this. Now, are there perils to AI that we need to figure out how to address? Sure. There are scam artists who have already taken the voices of, say, somebody's grandchild and then used that voice over the phone to convince an old person to give away their money. There are just cruel uses of this technology that have already started to develop. But at the same time, the government's involvement here really makes me nervous because all of the history here of the left's involvement with the internet is more censorship, more restriction on information, and more distortion of what's actually going on, more distortion of reality.
Yeah, certainly I think we should be nervous the fact that there's, just a few companies that have total control over this technology and we're worried about how they're going to use it. The issue is, okay, so what does regulation of that actually look like? And ultimately, what the Democrats are focused on is regulating speech. They want to make sure that you are not able to speak a certain way. Or actually with AI, we've seen this with ChatGPT. They want to make sure it's as woke as possible. That, if you ask it who the 45th president was, that maybe it's not even telling you because Donald Trump is, not fit to be consumed or whatever. So,
yes.
This is something we really gotta. I do think there's a role for regulation on this, but it cannot be what the Democrats are looking for.
Yeah, and when they say they want to remove bias from artificial intelligence platforms, you and I both know what that actually means. So if you were to ask artificial intelligence for an accurate description, say, of affirmative action, what is affirmative action in clear terms? Well, the answer is it's racial prejudice that they believe is beneficial, but it is racial prejudice. Now, the platforms won't say that. They won't say, they will be tailored to give the most left-wing possible spin as a justification for racial prejudice.
Yeah, absolutely. You'll see something, basically responding with the best argument for equity you can possibly find. And,
Right.
and ultimately this is going to be true on all sorts of things. And we've seen this with ChatGPT, which I think kind of provided the preview for what's to come, because ChatGPT has already kind of been wokeified in many ways. But, if you ask for, climate data, for example, they're not going to give you the climate data. They're going to give you the climate narrative. And I think we have to be cognizant, all of these companies are going to be doing this. And if the Democrats get their hands involved as well, it'll only be worse.
I saw a report from Fox News earlier this week that there are some things being done with artificial intelligence that are absolutely psychotic. The headline is "Artificial Intelligence Could Help Normalize Child Sexual Abuse as Graphic Images Erupt Online," according to experts. They say that AI is opening the door to a disturbing trend of people creating realistic images of children in sexual settings, which could increase the number of cases of sex crimes against kids in real life, experts warn. What do we make of this type of use of AI, and how do we address kind of the evil tendencies that exist out there? And by the way, in that question, should we be careful not to hand the government the keys to restricting liberty of all kinds?
Yeah, look, so at American Principles Project, we've worked a lot on the pornography issue, and this is an argument that always comes out. Should we allow pedophiles to have digital pornography of kids, because then they won't be, likely to act? We all know that's not true. But, the reality here is that I do think there's a concern here of what AI can be used for. We've already kind of seen it with deep fakes. It's going to be harder and harder to tell reality from the truth. And I think when you're involving pornography with that gets pretty messed up. And so we're going to make sure, I think there needs to be liability in place where if an AI company is creating porn of, let's say, a celebrity, and it's not real, and that's being spread all over the internet, I think the celebrity has every right to have grounds to sue them.
Yeah. Also, we can't be that far from entire court cases being thrown out when people, cook up defenses that include, well, there's no way for you to know whether that's a real photo or artificial intelligence. You know what I mean? Like you could summon that up in a defense if you can just plant enough seed of doubt in the minds of the jury. Artificial intelligence is going to create an out for a whole bunch of defendants, including people who are actually guilty.
Absolutely. I mean, this is scary stuff. And we actually talked about this previously, Vince, but I remember the joke being, oh, millennials will never be able to run for public office because they posted on social media, and so we've lived our lives online. Well, now we're actually dealing, especially in politics, with stuff you didn't even do. You're going to be accused of doing because these AI fakes are so good, and we've seen that kind of satirically, but with both Trump and DeSantis,
yes,
both of them have had AI fakes, and they're real sounding. And frankly pretty funny.
Yeah, I feel bad for Joy Reid because she could have used this defense years ago when she had her homophobic blog. But artificial intelligence just wasn't developed enough yet for that excuse, so she had to go with something else. She did claim that the FBI had launched an investigation into who wrote the blog. We never got the results of that, so add that to the list of FBI scandals, Jon Schweppe.
Yeah, we're gonna start going with, hey, if the algorithmic voice doesn't fit, you must acquit.
Yes, that's exactly right. All right, so final thoughts, if you will, John, on what you make of the White House compelling. It is interesting that the New York Times, even with their headline today, said that these companies are only acting, quote, from pressure from the White House. Here you have, yet again, the government using coercion to restrict speech by some of the biggest companies on the planet.
Well, they recognize, Google right now is the biggest source for information, the search engine, and that's why they censor it so aggressively. ChatGPT, if it was left to its own devices and it was a free platform, it would quickly become that as well. So they know in terms of choking information off, they got to do that. And this is why I think Republicans really have to engage this AI issue, because ultimately, if we just let the Democrats come up with all the quote-unquote solutions, it's going to be anti-liberty, anti-speech.
Every single time. Every time they talk about all of the censorship, for instance, in the last election, it's the Republicans who are trying to figure out ways to make it so that speech can flourish online. It's the Democrats who are looking to censor. It's the same pattern every single time, and they all say they need to address the social media companies. They have very different plans, I assure you. Jon Schweppe, thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate that.
Hey, thanks so much.
Good to chat with you. Yeah, among these commitments that the companies apparently made to the White House, Here's what the New York Times lists out. They say security testing of their AI products, in part by independent experts, and to share information about their products with governments and others who are attempting to manage the risks of the technology. No, this is the government sticking its hand into this. That's what that is. Ensuring that consumers are able to spot AI-generated material by implementing watermarks or other means of identifying generated content. Sure, I'll believe it when I see it. Publicly reporting the capabilities and limitations of their systems on a regular basis, including security risks and evidence of bias. Bias does not arrive until the Biden administration gets involved. Bias is what they're injecting into this system. That the answers will be tailored to prevent your feelings from being hurt? Come on. Deploying advanced artificial intelligence tools to tackle society's biggest challenges like curing cancer and combating climate change. Come on. Now, I will point out that some of the advances in artificial intelligence as it relates to medicine are pretty cool. Really neat. For instance, you could have a patient who's getting inpatient treatment at the hospital connected to a bunch of machines. You know, they're tracking their vitals and their doses and everything else that's going in and out of their body. And what artificial intelligence is able to do at a pretty rapid clip is to identify when a patient is heading in a direction or speeding towards a condition that a human may not be able to detect quite as quickly. So there are really neat uses for this advanced computing technology that will be life-saving, that already are life-saving, super valuable. But the White House is meddling in all of it. And they also want to conduct research on the risks of bias, once again, discrimination, and the invasion of privacy from the spread of AI tools. That's precisely the opposite of what's going on. They're injecting bias, injecting discrimination, injecting bigotry, foreclosing on factual conversations by interfering with these artificial intelligence systems. That is what's happening. Don't get it twisted. They're not protecting you. They're lording over you. They're trying to rule you. Well, Bud Light's still taking it in the can. Americans are rejecting the beer and all of the Anheuser-Busch products. And Bud Light has been trying to win everybody back through a very lame social media campaign, and it's not working. They tweeted earlier this week, yesterday morning, and they tagged the U.S. women's soccer team, U.S. women's national team, and they wrote, "Let's go, U.S. women's national team," and they put an American flag. Well, there's some obvious reactions to this. So now Bud Light is celebrating the women's team. Just like 5 minutes ago, you were celebrating men who are women now. This doesn't exactly work. So they were what we called ratioed on Twitter. That is, people, more comments than any other type of reaction. Just people just lighting Bud Light on fire for pretending to stand up for women when they were all for supplanting women entirely very recently. And that's why their stock price is taking it in the can, as I mentioned. They're just absolutely stepping on rakes everywhere they go. They should have just admitted guilt a while ago. They should have released an ad saying, "We screwed up," and then do something funny like launch the blue-haired idiot who came up with this into the sun and just say, "We're not going to do that anymore. We're a beer company. We're not going to be morons anymore." They could have just put an ad out like that, and it would have, boom, everything would have been fine. But no. Now everywhere you go, they're giving away Bud Light. Have you been to a Nationals game at all lately? I went to a Nationals game a couple weeks ago. They were giving discounts on the Bud Light. On July 4th, they were giving out to the entire stadium. Everybody gets a free Bud Light. Oh, wow. Do you think they were doing that for the benefit of the people who were attending, or because their fridges were stocked with expiring Bud Light that they needed to get rid of? I think we know the answer. Ron DeSantis did an interview last night on the Fox News channel, and he said that apparently the state pension fund, the Florida pension fund, has some money invested in Anheuser-Busch, in InBev, actually, is the name of the company now. And they're looking at divesting and then further opening an inquiry into whether the company basically violated their fiduciary responsibility and screwed over their shareholders by focusing on stupidity and wokeness rather than their bottom line, than to looking out for the best interests of their shareholders. Here's Ron DeSantis last night with Jesse Waters.
So we're going to be launching an inquiry about Bud Light and InBev, and it could be something that leads to a derivative lawsuit filed on behalf of the shareholders of the Florida pension fund, because at the end of the day, there's got to be penalties for when you put business aside to focus on your social agenda at the expense of hardworking people.
So that's cool. And you know what I like about this? This kind of goes in line with all of these governors, to include Ron DeSantis. He's already done this, who have said, you know what? We're going to take our state pension funds and we're going to remove them from places who are hurting the citizens of our state. So BlackRock, you don't get to manage our funds anymore. Vanguard, State Street, you don't get to manage our funds anymore. We're pulling out our state pension funds from these locations because you are violating the trust of the people who are saving up for their retirement by misusing their money. Instead of accruing more money for their retirement, you're pursuing these demented political projects. We're out. That's the posture. And here's Ron DeSantis obviously grabbing hold of this important, Bud Light moment, this controversy, because Bud Light really stepped in it. And you're looking at normal people across the country saying, no more for you. They crushed their Bud Light cans and they said, no more. I'm not doing that anymore. No more crapping on my family. That's not happening. And Bud Light's still feeling the consequences of that. Good for DeSantis for speaking up there about the state pension fund in Florida. Coming up, we're going to be joined by Matt Lewis. He has a brand new book on how all of these politicians have become so filthy rich, and it's not with their taxpayer-funded salaries. No. It's something far worse. Good afternoon to you. 4:35 now. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Great to have you with us. Coming up, Alicia Brand will be with us at 5 o'clock from Army of Parents. We'll chat with her about Loudoun County officials who have been stealing from taxpayers in Loudoun County to go on fancy trips overseas. The finest accommodations on the planet. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Nancy Pelosi is estimated to be worth somewhere in the vicinity of $120 million by some estimates. Others have her at $165 million. Pretty awesome to be valued at over $100 million. How did that happen? Well, my next guest has been digging into that very question, and not just about Pelosi. Matt Lewis is a columnist at the Daily Beast now. He is a friend of mine for many years, an old colleague of mine, and he's out with a new book called Filthy Rich Politicians, the Swamp Creatures, Latte Liberals, and Ruling Class Elites Cashing In on America. Matt Lewis, good to talk to you today, sir.
Hey, Vince, good to talk to you.
I'm so glad you wrote the book on this subject, because I think a lot of people do wonder what is actually going on behind the scenes that leads to someone like Nancy Pelosi becoming so stinking rich. What's the answer to that? How does that happen?
Well, it is interesting, right? Because she makes less than $200,000 a year, but she would have to work 500 years to earn her net worth if she was just making money from her congressional salary. So, most of it comes from her husband, Paul Pelosi's investments. And I'm sure some of them are perfectly legitimate, but some of them look very swampy and very curious.
Yes, and I remember there's various times where it seems like, and I'm grateful. There's now some reporting of people who track some of the stock purchases and stock sales of the Pelosi family, and they weirdly, coincidentally, seem to line up with really big decisions by the federal government that, in the end, benefit them financially.
Totally, right? So there's one in 2020 where Paul Pelosi buys hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of call options in Tesla stock. And then 5 weeks later, Joe Biden signs an executive order mandating the transition of federal, state, and local fleets to zero emissions vehicles. Mm-hmm. Imagine what happened to that stock. It went through the roof. And then 1 year later, just a year later, Paul Pelosi buys exercises $10 million worth of call options on Microsoft. This time, just 2 weeks later, the U.S. Army announces that Microsoft has won a bid to produce augmented reality headsets for the U.S. Army. And that could be worth tens of billions of dollars over the next decade or so.
Yeah.
It seems coincidental, right?
Now, for people outside of government, there are insider trading rules, I thought, that governed much of this. So you're not allowed to use privileged information in order to make these investments, and yet it seems that you have government officials who are doing this with a reckless abandon, Matt.
Right. I mean, so up until 2012, it was actually legal for members of Congress to engage in insider trading. But then they passed something called the Stock Act. But it's now illegal to do insider trading, but it's very difficult to police. And I don't know for sure if what Paul Pelosi is doing is insider trading.
Sure.
But it looks very suspicious. And so my argument in the book Filthy Rich Politicians is that whether it's insider trading or not, it erodes trust in our lawmakers and in the process. So I think we should ban congressional stock trading altogether to avoid even the appearance of impropriety.
How common is the Pelosi family tactic in your view? I mean, how many lawmakers are becoming enriched to unseemly levels while they're in Congress?
I mean, I think it's across the board. If you get elected, you're very likely to get richer while you're in office. And there are different ways. In some cases, it's as innocuous as book deals. For example, Ron DeSantis just became a millionaire because of a book deal. Bernie Sanders said, you too, literally, he said, you too can be a millionaire. This is a socialist if you write a best-selling book like me. But I think the insider trading thing is the most corrosive.
Yes.
And it's bipartisan, by the way. I mean, Nancy Pelosi, I think, is the most egregious example, but there are Republicans who are doing the same thing.
Yeah, it's just fascinating. I understand that, like, some of these guys are trading on their much higher profile. You know, you write a book because you're well known, and then you sell it and you make some money from it. And I think that some people can look at that and say, I certainly look at that and go, okay, that's not like the most corrupt thing ever. It starts to get more corrupt when all of a sudden you have like lobbyists and special interest groups buying copies of a book that nobody else would read just to enrich you, and then you turn around and do their bidding.
Totally. And we're talking about, somebody, a super PAC who buys 50,000 copies of a book, which maybe pushes it on the New York Times bestseller list, which
yes.
Results in royalties that potentially get pocketed by the politician. So the other thing, honestly, Vince, is these politicians don't quit cashing in once they leave office, right? A lot of them take the revolving door into lobbying jobs.
Yeah.
There's
some of them for foreign governments,
wealth.
For that matter.
Indeed. And then some of them spread the wealth around to friends and family. And in some cases, their friends and family trade off of their names. I don't have to go into Hunter Biden, but it does happen.
Yes, it definitely does. I remember when Bob Menendez was on trial for all of the lavish trips and gifts that he was being given by an ophthalmologist in Florida called Solomon Melgen. And it was basically a corruption trial. It was like, look, you're being bribed to take official government action on behalf of this guy. And by the end of the trial, they had a hung jury because Menendez had mounted this defense. Well, he's my friend, so he's allowed to give me things, and then I'm allowed to give him things. And then it was like, okay, I guess that's an excuse. So there is really corruption happening right in front of us, and there are, in many cases, very few consequences for it.
Definitely. And we saw, in Virginia, Bob McDonnell, the former governor of Virginia, once a rising star, had his political career was really essentially ended because his wife took gifts, a Rolex watch from a donor, and I think they paid for his daughter's wedding or something. And ultimately, I believe the Supreme Court said that it didn't actually violate Virginia law, that you can, if you're friends with someone, they can give you gifts. And if you're friends with really rich people who also happen to be, influence peddlers. It's, I guess, technically legal. It still did ruin his political career, but he didn't. He ended up, being, I guess, in a way, exonerated.
Yeah, there are lots of things that are technically legal but totally unseemly. So what is the solution here? You did mention as a solution that we shouldn't allow members of Congress, and I would assume that means members of their immediate household too, to trade on their access to information inside the government. Is your view that they should have their money in a blind trust or something?
I would go even farther than that. I would go to you could have mutual funds, and that's it. If you want to be in Congress, you should not be, cannot be engaged in individual stock trades. Same thing with your immediate family. And what's funny, Vince, my book came out, Filthy Rich Politicians, came out on Tuesday. And on Wednesday, there was a bill that was announced that Josh Hawley and Kristen Gillibrand, so it's a bipartisan bill, Senate bill, are introducing a bill that would do just this. And not only would it ban stock trading for members of Congress and their families, but it would extend to staffers. And I completely support that. And I hope it passes, but I don't think it will because everyone is theoretically in favor of this, but it never happens.
I know.
I would also ban hiring families. I would, you can have a book deal if you want, if you're a politician, but you shouldn't make $1 million off of it.
Yes.
I would go with term limits, a 10-year moratorium on lobbying after you leave Congress. My book has a whole bunch of reforms that I think would not going to solve the problem, but I think would definitely restore some trust in our institutions.
Speaking of hiring families, I'm reminded of Congresswoman Maxine Waters. She hired her own daughter to be a part of her campaign and then paid her $81,000. So what they're doing is they take this campaign money, all of this money that they're receiving from people who are donating to the campaign and turning around and laundering it essentially into the family coffers by paying their kids and their relatives for, some nominal job, but big sums of money.
Totally. It's completely legal, of course. And, Ilhan Omar directed millions of dollars to her husband's consulting firm out of her campaign. Bernie Sanders, for many years, has paid his wife, Jane, and even her kids out of his campaign fund to do things that she wasn't qualified to do, including being a media buyer. So this happens all the time, and it's perfectly legal.
Yeah, perfectly legal. Remember when Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm, when she arrived in the Biden administration, she owned a bunch of equity in an electric bus company called Proterra when she got into office. And then, of course, what is the Biden administration pushing? They're pushing purchasing electric vehicles, in fact, forcing them on the American public. And it was only because of dedicated scrutiny by Republicans that she eventually divested from this electric bus company. But this is an obvious thing. If you're looking at ethical violations, this is an obvious conflict of interest. How could you come into office as the energy secretary holding a bunch of equity in an electric vehicle company?
Exactly, Vince. And so part of my argument is that, when Donald Trump says the game is rigged and then he wants to drain the swamp, that resonates because it's true.
Yes.
I mean, I think a lot of Americans, and no matter how you feel about Donald Trump, a lot of Americans completely agree with him on that because it is true. And my argument is whether someone like Jennifer Granholm or Nancy Pelosi, whether they are actually doing something illegal, not illegal, but whether they're cashing in or whether it just looks really suspicious, it almost doesn't matter.
Yes.
Because either way, they are eroding trust in our politicians and in liberal democracy. I think it's incredibly toxic and corrosive for our politics.
Yeah, we're gonna do a story coming up about how Loudoun County officials have been taking really lavish taxpayer-funded trips overseas to places like Ghana and Uruguay and getting the nicest hotel rooms and upgrading their flights and paying for extra luggage on the way back to carry their souvenirs. And this is, you want to talk about eroding trust and making people think that you're just scumbags living high on the hog on the taxpayer dime. That's a good way to do it. By the way, on the issue of Nancy Pelosi, I want to remind people of what she said when she was asked about her stock market activity.
Should members of Congress and their spouses be banned from trading individual stocks while serving in Congress?
No, I don't know to the second one. We have a responsibility to report in the stock, on the stock, but I'm not familiar with that 5-month review, but if people aren't reporting, they should be. Because this is a free market and we're a free market economy. They should be able to participate in that.
Nancy Pelosi, big friend and fan of capitalism. She's saying, look, hey, don't you mess with my individual stock trades. It's worked out really well for me, Matt Lewis.
It sounds like she's Milton Friedman or Hayek or something. I love it. We're a free market economy.
Yeah, don't you know?
She changed her tune, though. AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, criticized her after that, and Pelosi flipped. And so now Pelosi's on the right side. At least she pretends to be. Yeah. For banning stock trading. Yeah.
Even this whole concept of a blind trust, doesn't that have some big loopholes in it? Because it does feel like when people say blind trust, I'm never quite sure what they even mean. Does that mean that you have a broker who handles it but won't tell you the buys and sell and trades that he's making? Because if that's the case, you could just tell your broker, like, hey, I have no idea what you're trading, but I just want you to know there's a huge bill that's about to pass Congress. Do with that what you will.
I'm with you, Vince. It's not enough. That ship has sailed. If they wanted to institute reforms to prevent this, banning stock trading, they should have done it. It's too late. It looks sketchy, and I've seen so many examples where there's something that clearly looks like insider trading, and then the politician says, oh, I have a blind trust. I don't even know what my broker's doing. And I just don't buy it. So I think too little, too late.
All right. Well, this is a real public service, this book. It's called Filthy Rich Politicians. The author is Matt K. Lewis. Matt, so great to have you with us, and congratulations on the book, sir. I don't think there's any other way to view this. Loudoun County officials have been stealing from the taxpayers in order to take lavish trips to places like Ghana and Uruguay. And this is all courtesy of excellent reporting from the reporter Nick Minnock out of WJLA. And he's found that you've got a number of people, including Loudoun County Board Chair Phyllis Randall and 3 other county supervisors, who are flying all over the place, who are doing it and spending tons of Why are county officials going on foreign trips at all? What the heck is going on there? They don't have any diplomatic responsibilities. They're county officials. Their job is to be responsible for the affairs, the government affairs of Loudoun County. And when they travel, they don't travel in economy. They don't fly like the rest of us. They don't fly in coach. They fly business class. Here's Loudoun County Chairwoman Phyllis Randall. She flew to Ghana on United Polaris business class. It cost taxpayers more than $7,400 for her flight. And here she is justifying it this week to Nick Minnock. Listen to this audio.
Well, I know there's cabinet members who do the same kind of travel more frequently than you do. And they
cabinet
fly.
Members?
Yep, Pete Buttigieg, for example, flies economy. Mm-hmm. He doesn't seem to have a problem, and I don't see him on Polaris business on United.
Well, then that's when the Pete Buttigieg is not the chief elected official of the federal government. I am the chief elected official of the county.
Whoa! So I'm more important than Pete Buttigieg is Phyllis Randall's excuse here. He's the Secretary of Transportation. That's nothing. Try being the chief elected official of Loudoun County, Virginia. If that's you, you get to fly business class on United Polaris. $7,400 for a flight to Ghana. Take that, Pete Buttigieg. Phyllis Randall gets the caviar. You get coach.